Welcome back to 105 by 68 Power. In the previous chapter, we talked about why people want to own football clubs: power, identity, influence, visibility, and non-financial returns that often matter far more than profit.
That chapter was about motivation, about desire, about what ownership promises emotionally and symbolically.
This chapter is about what happens after that desire meets reality, because motivation alone doesn't create power.
Power only exists when it's embedded in a structure that can actually exercise it.
And in modern football, that structure increasingly sits outside the club itself.
So today, we're not talking about owners as personalities. We're talking about ownership as architecture. Because very often, the football club is no longer the place where final decisions live.
The central question of this episode is simple but uncomfortable. What happens when the football club is no longer the top of its own pyramid?
Not when a club buys another club. Not when a presentation mentions synergies or long-term vision. We mean something more fundamental.
When the club becomes one unit inside a larger corporate system.
That's what we call a corporate group or a holding structure. A parent entity that controls the club and governs it from above, often alongside assets that may have nothing to do with football.
And it's important to be precise here. This model does not require owning multiple football clubs. That's a common misconception.
A holding can control a single football club and still behave exactly like a holding, because the defining feature is vertical control, not horizontal expansion.
The parent entity may also control other sports clubs, media businesses, real estate, stadium infrastructure, marketing platforms, or data and IP assets.
The football club becomes one operating unit inside a portfolio, visible, emotional, symbolic, but no longer sovereign.
So the first mental shift is this: the club is no longer the organization, it's the interface. The organization exists elsewhere.
In traditional football logic, the club is the center of gravity. Decisions are debated internally, power struggles happen locally, and authority ultimately sits inside the institution.
In a holding structure, the center of gravity moves, and that shift is subtle enough that many people don't notice it at first.
You can see it in the simplest possible diagram. Traditional logic: club, owner, management, team.
Holding logic: holding, club management, team.
That small change alters everything, because once the holding sits above the club, it becomes the real strategic brain.
It defines objectives, it sets financial ceilings, it establishes risk tolerance. It decides what kind of instability is acceptable and what is not.
Meanwhile, the club still carries the identity. It absorbs emotion. It takes pressure from fans, media, and local politics. But the club no longer owns the final authority.
This is where misunderstanding often begins. Distance is interpreted as indifference.
In reality, distance is often a deliberate design choice. It allows control with reduced exposure.
Let's make this concrete. Inside many holding structures, club executives regularly refer to a sporting board or football committee at group level.
Sometimes this board is highly directive, approving budgets, validating senior appointments, defining recruitment principles, or setting performance benchmarks. In other cases, it's formally advisory. Club leadership retains final decision-making power, but is expected to inform, align, and justify decisions upward.
And this distinction is often overstated, because even when the board is only informed, behavior changes.
When you know decisions are reviewed above you, you self-regulate, you anticipate reactions, you internalize group logic before anyone speaks.
Power doesn't always need to be exercised explicitly. In holding structures, it's embedded structurally.
This affects day-to-day football decisions. Recruitment profiles are shaped by budget frameworks. Coaching appointments are filtered through risk models. Crisis responses are calibrated to group tolerance.
Even when the club appears autonomous, the range of acceptable choices is already narrowed.
This is why many club executives inside holdings describe their role as narrower than it appears from the outside.
They still lead, but within a frame they didn't design.
And to understand why this model exists, you can't start from football culture. You have to start from capital.
Corporate holding structures are solutions to capital problems, not football problems.
The first problem is risk. Football is volatile by nature. Results swing. Injuries happen. Relegation exists. Qualification changes revenue overnight.
A holding spreads that volatility, not necessarily by owning multiple football clubs, but by balancing football risk against other assets.
Losses become absorbable. Failure becomes survivable. Risk turns from existential threat into a managed variable.
The second problem is capital efficiency. Football clubs generate large revenues, but operate on fragile margins and rigid cost structures.
Holdings centralize cash management, optimize debt, and impose financial discipline that many clubs historically never had.
That discipline can stabilize operations, but it also reframes priorities.
The third problem is exposure. Operating above the club shields decision-makers from constant scrutiny.
Unpopular decisions still happen, but pressure remains local. Blame sticks to the club, not the structure.
And this produces a clear internal shift.
Club executives often move from being architects to implementers.
Autonomy becomes conditional on budgets, on group strategy, on timing, on risk appetite.
That doesn't make leadership meaningless, but it does redefine it.
Now we reach the cultural tension, because football clubs are not neutral assets.
They're social institutions, symbols, emotional anchors.
Holdings don't erase that, but they don't automatically privilege it either. Identity becomes something to manage, not something that governs decisions.
There are real advantages to this model, and it's important to acknowledge them.
Strategic stability, less emotional governance, longer planning horizons.
Professionalization, clear hierarchies, accountability, fewer chaotic power struggles.
Knowledge continuity. Systems and processes survive staff turnover.
And exit optionality. Capital becomes flexible, assets become tradable.
But each advantage generates tension.
Sporting misalignment, loss of local autonomy, fan alienation, regulatory friction.
These are not failures. They are the cost of coherence.
And that brings us to the core insight of this episode.
Corporate holding structures optimize football for control, stability, scalability, and capital flexibility.
Which means optimizing football for capital, not for meaning. So here's the question we leave you with.
When power moves above the club, the crest stays the same.
The stadium stays the same. The songs stay the same.
But the logic changes.
And once you understand that shift, another path becomes visible. Clubs that don't just reorganize power above themselves, but expose themselves directly to capital markets.
That's a different mechanism with different constraints.
Next episode, public companies and listed clubs.
This is 105 by 68 Power.